This is the Men's Room Podcast, where relief is your duty and your innate self is welcome. I'm your host, Ish Mendoza, and I'm pleased to have you back. In this episode, we pick up right where we left off in the conversation between Anthony and I. Our chat remains intense as we dive more into philosophy, relationships, religion, and spirituality. We'll hear more about his incredible life journey, and just a heads up, we'll be talking about some sensitive topics that may be triggering to some. So without further delay, let's get into it.
I didn't know that I could be someone who might be considered a smart, common sense guy, and I looked at education as like this thing that was above me, and it wasn't until I went back to school later that I realized like, oh, I enjoy this, and yeah, I enjoy this, and I feel like I've learned so much, and that experience is really nice, and I feel smarter, I don't know.
You deserve it though too. That's another layer of who we are too. Is like, so for me, like, my college experience was like, I came out, I was a good high school student, and then I had a scholarship my first year at Fresno State. So it was great, but I squandered that by like being in the mindset of like a broke person, like a poor person. So I was like, I started working, like, first semester out of high school, I started working, and I was just like, well, I'm making, and at the time it was like, I'm making $2 more than minimum wage, so I'm doing all right, and so, and it's also like my parents, like, their biggest thing, they never pushed for college, they didn't go to college themselves, they're kind of like, you get a job or you go to school, which one are you choosing? And so for me, I'm like, I'm making a little bit of money, I got a car now, and so my experience with that was kind of like, it wasn't so focused on like the trying to get out of a better situation.
Wow. Yeah. It's funny that you say that. It's like, I don't, we never had that conversation. It was like, we were so stressed with just surviving, we were so preoccupied with surviving that, there was never a conversation with my mom about, all right, well, it's time to do your grown-up stuff,
And yeah, a lot of people that like, I run in circles with right now, like, professional people and successful people and stuff too. It's like, and it's also like, it's a very like white American kind of cultural thing. Is like, you're 18, you're out of the house, buddy. You're going to be going off to college.
Because you've been already conditioning to do so.
Yeah. And I was like, well, we also have a college fund for you. I never had a college fund. It was never
get
that.
Get out of here with that.
Yeah. And so the idea of that, that's like my parents were like, oh, you're working, good for you, mijo. Like, it's like, it's good. And so there was never this emphasis on that, but also like, myself being a very unmotivated 18 and 19-year-old, just kind of like, I'm making my way, and I'm also like doing my thing, like I can go out and, I can go travel. Like I would go to San Diego or whatever, like, I'd blow my paycheck just to do something, so but that for me was like, I didn't have this like motivation to do that, but like, that was, and there's more, speaking of systematic things, there's more like that goes into that, as well as kind of like this idea of like college being like this experience that everybody should have, this coming of age thing. I almost envy a lot of those people that had like this college experience where they like lived on campus and they did all these things, I never got to do that. It's just like,
I didn't do that either. That was not even on. Yeah, when I saw that happening all around me, it was like, wow, like these people are doing it, and here I am, like failing upwards. Summer school was keeping me afloat, and which is funny because apparently I really liked school when I was really young, but somewhere that shifted, and that was around the time my dad passed away. So maybe that had some influence. I don't know, because the order is gone. Even as chaotic as it was, it's two parents, and there's something kind of tugging you along when it comes to order, even if it's in the midst of all the chaos. And and then I don't know, we moved again, and school was just not. It became rough. I feel, looking back, her name and stuff. I remember the teacher, and I know her daughter passed away, which is really sad and real. And now that I'm an adult, I think like, maybe I was a brat, but I had a rough teaching experience, it was not a good experience when I was in the 4th grade. I want to say the teacher was bad, and then I had her again in the 5th grade, and so it was like, I can't help to think that that was such a horrible education experience that it completely shifted my mind about what education was, and something I wasn't good at, maybe. Maybe I wasn't good at it. Not necessarily that I didn't like it, but that I wasn't good at it. And so was that because of my home life? Was it because of a bad teacher? Was it a combination of all these things? And my role of it, whether, if of things I can't remember. But yeah. And so it wasn't until I was an adult that, I, years of working and like, okay, like I got a car now, and then thinking to myself, I got to go back now, kind of on my own, got out of a long relationship. And I thought, well, this is what I got to do. I was in this relationship for so long that we kind of grew up together. And, after 8 years that ended, and there I was like, okay, I got to do the things I got to do now. And so, but getting into school, I was faced with that fear again, as an adult man, like, and a young man, of course, but still older than the general going to college for the first year age.
You weren't 18 and 19, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but it was in that moment that I did realize, like, oh, I'm not the worst at this. I could do this. Like, I enjoy the topics. I really enjoy learning, and especially about these things. And I had this teacher who kind of changed everything for me. I took him for a history class, and I still, to this day, Professor Gilmore. I have a funny story about running into him at a bar and how I was drunk. I made a fool out of myself. But he talked about, it was like history from 1880s around, I want to say, maybe, if I remember correctly, till present day. And and a good history teacher is a good storyteller, and he didn't explain it with, how they say the names and dates. Like, he talked about the power dynamic behind it all and like how things were happening. And he had this saying that I loved so much, like just really opened me up. But just, he would say, you always hear that saying, that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. He had this kind of way of talking. And he goes, but you have to remember that if anything is ever the way it is, someone made it that way. And just the way he would say it, he had such a presence in the room, and he would talk all these historical moments. He would really unpack the underlying history and the connections and the backroom conversations and all this stuff, and like what was really said behind closed doors. He would talk about these historical moments through that experience, or interpretation of it all. And so you really saw the posturing that society does all around. And this is true of us as people and psychologically too, but also on a massive structural layer, level, systemic level, how there's two worlds, it's the one of perception and there's the one of actuality. And that's how he explained history too. And so, and even me saying that right now, it's like, I see the connect between how I got really into philosophy and stuff like that and political science, which is what I studied. But what got me on that path was this history professor and how just good he was at explaining history. And so like, oh, things about power, I'll get into political science because, these systems are kind of the center of power, and I want to know how it all works. I want to know how it all works because I want to know, and for many reasons, economically, of course, but also for my own self. Why am I? And this is where it gets into like colleges and like the whole idea of like social justice nowadays, which is a very touchy topic these days, but it does serve a purpose in some ways, for discovery, of the way the world really works. And it is cynical in many ways, like corruption is all around us. And so you need to understand that. But I think where things have fallen off is we don't see that and understand that amount of knowledge is a tool to then do more. And this whole wave of, oppression, everyone kind of like trying to unpack it in so many different ways, is that it is an end. Like that is the end of the identity, to say, I'm oppressed. And this is kind of what you were referring to earlier, but I'm oppressed. Therefore I have an excuse for
this is why I react
condition that I find myself in.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that is true, but it doesn't seem to come with a solution. it ends its identity there. And that's where I think, I went through that phase of like, super progressivism, which I still am very progressive, very, very progressive, I think, but, I guess, the window shifts, but, and going through that was necessary for me, understanding the way the world works and how horrible it is, when it comes to corruption and oppression and all these things, but that they're really just pieces of a bigger picture to a more well-rounded person at the end of the day, or at the end of a life, or whatever. And so it is to acknowledge that, but then to ask yourself, and this is something I always tell myself all the time when I'm dealing with something, that it took me a while to even come to this, but once I did, I would always tell myself, well, what are you going to do about it? And what helped motivate me was my mom. That's how that's what I felt like her mantra was, Wow. It's like, what are you going to do about it? And in talks we've had, which we don't really talk about our past at all. We don't talk about these experiences. Just, they're almost like tales, like just known, like there's one really interesting one tied to religion. It's good for the especially the kind of religion we grew up with, where there's these messages from God, and we really appreciate them.
Prophetic
words, And so there was a guy who came into town and to a church we just recently started going to, or something like that, because we had moved and we're like, oh, we can go down to the street, this church over here, because we can't make it over there because we didn't have cars most of the time. And when we did, we slept in them. But
sorry to laugh.
No, I laugh at it all the time. And so my dad was already pretty bad off, and there was a revival. They're like, oh, come to this revival. The revivals, and it was a really revival? Famous. No, that's in the other part of the country. But it was this really famous guy who I forget. My mom said his name, and he was like a really famous like
preacher
and healer.
Okay.
And he was praying for all of us and stuff, and he told my parents that, oh, your little girl has been dealing with demons in the night, hasn't she? And my sister, during that time, she would have these weird, crazy night terrors. Like she would act strange, and when you grow up in that world too, it's so real to you, But like as an adult, we could talk about how we feel about it nowadays. But still, interestingly enough, at least my memory serves me well, I think, in this, she would have these crazy night terrors where she looked possessed, she'd act all crazy. Now, looking back, who knows what was causing that, because there was a lot of traumatic things that happened to the girls in our family from very young ages growing up the way we did.
Which I will say that there's a correlation between the historical spiritual way that we grew up in, like the psychological
traumas that manifest from actual,
they're one and the same in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Maybe, but I think it is. I think that it's easy to say that and hang your hat up on that when it comes to the negative aspects. Mm-hmm. But I feel like we tend to go the opposite direction in reasoning when we talk about the positive aspects of spirituality.
True. That's very true.
But that thought is something that I think is important because what it is saying is that, it's exposes ourselves, because I feel that way sometimes too. And to be candid, I just thought of that right now. I was like, oh, that's a good, but it's a reminder to check your balance, your philosophy in life, because, that's actually in philosophy too, that you learn that it's like, it has to be consistent, mm-hmm. And if it's not consistent, no matter which way you direct your argument to in whatever context, well then, you have bad logic. Maybe your principles are off. You have to be consistent. That's a big part of it. And I really enjoy that, because that is a constant checking of yourself, kind of like this moment here where it's like, interesting that you say it. We usually tend to say that for the negative aspects of psychological impact, but not the positive ones where, because of God, this happened. But anyways, she was having night terrors, and the guy, he told him that, and they're like, yeah, and he prayed for it, and after that, she never had him again. But anyways, and then this gets even crazier. At least if, the legend is true. This is a real story, that my mom talks to us about. So it's as real as my mom. She's not the kind of person that would lie, mm-hmm. She, especially about stuff of, my dad and all this stuff. If anything, it's hard for her to talk about, sometimes, but yeah. And so then he told my dad, long story short, I don't know how exactly how it went, but he told my dad that he wanted him to stay behind after, and that he wanted to talk to him, and that he told him that God spoke to him and said that he's giving him one last chance right now to turn his life around. Wow. That he knows he's been getting into bad stuff, and he's giving him one last chance, or you're going to die in a year from now. And a year later, my dad died. And my mom had this, she was praying one night when my dad was out, because he was, last years of life, he was out, he was addicted to heroin. Mm-hmm. And so he got really bad. And that was, as I understand it, up because of kind of church too, in some ways, pushing him away in these negative ways. Because when you grow up in the church, there's those negative people in the church, and they really ruin your experiences, especially in small churches. Mm-hmm. They can control everything. And but anyways, and so he told him that, and it was a quiet ride home, Wow. And so my mom has said that he just felt really sad after that. Like, he just seemed really down for a little while, and then he went right back out, eventually. And my mom had this prayer, and that she said that God said that he was going to die by his own right hand, or something like that. Mm. And the gun that shot him was his own, that someone else got a hold of. Wow. And so there was that, eerie coincidence, in the religious household. And this is still kind of going back. It wasn't just that, woven between us and all this poverty and all this craziness was their religion, but it was also these spiritual things that were just felt so real, that is just like, ooh, like, what is that if not God or this spiritual world? And so, you make what you want of that. And to these days, I still have that kind of discussion with myself of what that all means, but it still comes down to this idea of belief in the higher power, but with the complete understanding that I am very subjective in this experience. And so I just happen to choose the religion that I do. But arguably not even in the same way that we grew up, like you mentioned, mm-hmm. with your experiences now with the church. And I also liked it for the same reasons. Like, I had a conversation with him, and I told him, that was one of the things I told him, was that it's very genuine. Mm-hmm. I go, in the Christian community, genuine is an alien word, at least for me, but maybe that's my experience in the way I grew up in the church again, it's
polarizing. I mean, because so many other people's experiences are similar in that maybe not the name, not the same, like, apostolic, Mexican family run church, but very judgmental. A lot of other things that go along.
When we moved to one of the next town after my dad was murdered, someone in the church started a rumor about my mom, essentially saying she can't be the treasurer anymore, because that was another way she had another little job. She had so many different jobs. She was working like 4 jobs at a time, man. I swear to God, and it's just crazy what that woman did. And that she's dating someone, and so the church, like, you can't
if you're not married.
They really got their eye on you of how close you are, and so she stopped going to church and stuff like that. So here's happened repeated, all over again in so many ways. And you could think about this in a religious way too, like, if you want to or willing to, but and I'm not even to say that I do, but just I think there's a lot of ways you can interpret this, but there was a lot of just evil there. There was a lot of bad just plaguing us, and just always following us. And so, and my mom always just did what she could. And so, but here we are in the church, and someone's starting a rumor about her, like, this woman isn't a widow and her son is in the hospital, and so then she stops going to church because of that, which is like our daycare, by the way. Like, we used to go to church Monday through Saturday sometimes because my mom was working so much. And so that's also how in eyeball deep we were in the church, because it was like the senior pastor was kind of like our babysitter, and he was an old man, so it was old, and he spoke nothing but Spanish. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish, so I'm with this super loving person that's might as well speak an alien language, okay? and I think that had a very significant impact on me too. It was like you saw what love really was, and even that, I like to sometimes think now, like, that was a gift of life, maybe from God, but a gift of life that another example of this thing that can be interpreted as such a horrible experience. But now I've come to realize, like, I see him as he showed me love and our family love, even against church, because there's the drama. I remember we didn't have money, so he's like, "Oh, put it on my tab, like the lunch in the middle." But they know that meant don't charge them, because they ain't gonna charge the senior pastor. And like I remember the lady like kind of like rolling her eyes and scoffing, like, "Oh, this helpless family," you know. And I'm just like, or this annoying family who needs help, you know, like, ooh, such a Christian thing to feel like in that moment. But those are the experiences I had.
How dare we be giving, you know?
Yeah, and so, but I remember feeling like, oh, embarrassed, like, oh, we're the kids getting the free food right now, but there's this man who doesn't speak a lick of English, and he tries to kind of, and he's super old, and he sings these songs. He barely plays the guitar. He does not play the guitar well, but he does his best, and it was just love, you know, like he cared for us so much. He really did. And it's hard to kind of get in all the details, but just understand when I say that, like, I know that he did so genuinely. And so I got this example of love and of duty and responsibility and love from my mom. You know, after long days of work, she'd come home and like play with my ears, you know, and I'd wake up to that kind of, I'd put me back to sleep. But like, in the wee hours of the night, in the little bits of sleep that she was allowed before she went right back out and worked a million jobs again, she's, you know, playing with my hair, things like that, you know. And while she's going through so much crazy stuff, like, you know, all this stuff is happening, and let's not forget the human of her, you know, that here she is, like the feelings, the same feelings that I felt when I'm at my worst, she must have felt so much worse. Like, I can't imagine how she never fell apart, and I'm sure she was always falling apart, but just putting herself back together. And you know, I had memories of like waking up and it's like something's dropping on my head and it's my mom crying, you know, her tears falling on my head, you know, and it's just like, and, well, by the way, all 6 kids are in one bed with her, of course.
Yeah,
her spirit is strong, you know, it must be for her love for us. But then we have this man who, he doesn't speak a lick of English, and he just cares about us. He's always there for us, but for his purpose of, you know, for God, you know. But like, that man was like the same way though that I appreciate it with my mom, but a reflection of love, or like an idea of love that is not even spoken, you know, a word not need to be spoken, you know, to understand what love is. And that is a very, very powerful lesson about what love is. You know, it's a feeling so strong.
It's another way in which you read the language, the body language. Another example that you were able to read, because literally you couldn't have the communication with him in the same way, but you gleaned that from his demeanor and the way he approached you. And so that, and you know, and nowadays I see that manifest itself in me to where I show my love through acts, you know, of generosity. And maybe I spread myself too thin too. And I wanted to ask you, you know, you're talking about how Tammy kind of regulates you. Do you think that is something, is there a way to interpret it to say that then it is not necessarily a quality of a good relationship to find someone that matches you, but to be your whole person? And if anything, we use that as a crutch to why we don't have to deal with something like being the one to have to say. That's very profound, and because so there's a lot to unpack there, because you struck a nerve. I would say that. So historically I have always found myself attracted to like strong, independent women, and it's probably because I was not a independent. I mean, I lived alone and I made my own way, but in a lot of ways I wasn't an independent thinker, and a lot of like literally like my mom did my laundry up until I was like 21 or something like that too. But so I was not a very independent person in that regard. Yeah. And so
that's just a good mom right there.
Yeah. Well, that's what I always imagined. But I was like, that's an enabling mom.
Yeah, it's an enabling for sure.
So my attraction to Tammy and women like her was due to maybe my lack of that foundation and balance in as well. And in the same way, historically, anybody that was in a relationship with was always this is gonna, you're one of the few people that will understand this, but was always like a pastor's daughter, because I wanted also in my own insecurities, I wanted somebody to kind of carry my own faith, because I kind of like, like I didn't feel as strong enough. And I felt like if I had this like person that was like able to carry my faith, then they can carry me through it kind of thing.
So you had the motivation to set that up though. You had the thought to have that as the anchor to religion in your life.
Unknowingly. Now I can see it.
I
But
see.
then it was just kind of like, in my mind, it's like, well, I'm pastor's daughters. I like them, or whatever it was, you know. But that was based on a lot of my own insecurities or my own flaws and things that I didn't find myself in such a way. Like, and so now looking back, I think that it's also my immaturity and a lot of things that I didn't know at the time that it was going through. And so when I became an evolved version of myself, there's ways in which that I was like, okay, now I am a strong and independent person now, and I'm capable of doing all these things. And so that can cause a clash, that can cause all these other things, because I'm like, I wasn't that person when you met me, but now I'm a better version of myself in that way too, So
okay, so then you could say that it's a, one, you can ask another question to say, well, is there anything wrong with that one? But two, to your point, which is that either way, it got you to this point in which now you are that bigger person. So that's how she provides that thing that allows you to be that whole person,
It's also, I think, a part of just like, when you, it takes a very special kind of person to like end up with a high school sweetheart or something, because you're so young when you get together.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
It's hard, like you become two different people,
Well,
like
you grow together. And so if anything, the separation of that is a strange place.
Yeah.
It really does feel like you yourself have died, or
Yeah.
you yourself are gone. And so there's this moment of self-discovery that is so just earth-shattering to you that it undoubtedly, for me, helped shift my paradigm about life, for the millionth time already, by the way. But yeah, I
mean, it's hard to navigate to that person, because it really takes two special, like, strong people to be able to like withstand the shifts and changes that one gets, even like physically, like you're not the same person you were when you're, slim fit, 18-year-old or whatever too.
Well, you have to become the person you are to know that person.
Right. Yeah. And it's a good and a bad thing. I think that, like, the high school sweethearts, the people that are able to like do that and spend like decades together and things like that, they're such a strong couple because of that, because of having withstand the shifts and the changes in their lives,
They grew together in the direction of the sun.
Yeah, exactly. They're these flowers that grow in the bed amongst weeds, but they're growing at the same pace, and be able to obtain the same soil and nutrients from the root as well. When I met Tammy, I was in a place. It's an interesting shift, because I was in a place where I was kind of established, and I was turning 29 when I met her, and it was like one of those things where I was like, I kind of like. I lived life a little bit. I knew what I didn't want in a relationship. So when we started dating, it was pretty easy to see, like, okay, this is somebody that doesn't have all those qualities that I didn't like in other people, And so the shift of that is like, I was in a more mature state, and I was a better version of myself. And we always talk about this before, because like those little flirtatious moments. You're like, would you have dated me if you were in high school? We both agreed like we probably wouldn't have, because we were like two different people in high school, and at that age and stuff too. But having met at the time we did just helped, like, shape it. There's always like, even still then, like, it's almost we're 9 years in now in our marriage, and I'm a different person now than I was then too. So
yes, yeah, always growing. We're always growing.
Yeah,
that's that is true of information that we have too, and that's why it's always important to kind of always be reflective and be slow to speak. Because this, it's always a life lesson. There to learn, and maybe you haven't learned it yet. So, and that's kind of the way I feel about life all the time. Is which is also why I have this idea, like, I really don't judge people. I don't really see good and evil or good and bad per se these days. Like, I understand that there are things that have negative consequences, of course, and things that have positive ones. But this moral kind of construct that we grew up on, I don't see it that way through the lens of the church of like good and evil. I see
It's not black and white.
it's not black and white. They are, and like you said, referring to the demons and stuff like that, they are manifestations of our own bad habits, And if anything, it's because we live with a monster inside of us all the time. And that's also why I don't really see it as like there are good people and there are bad people. Like, we're all good and bad. We're all capable of the worst, and if anything, you have to kind of acknowledge that you're capable of the worst to become that better person. You really do. And when you acknowledge that too, that side of yourself, and that in that side of yourself that you kind of control, that you tame, you not only become or a consequence of being that better person is that you don't judge, because you understand the crazy, weird, strange thoughts that have ever run through your mind, and the experiences that you've had in life, especially the ones that I've had, and anyone could say that of themselves. It's like, when could I have ever said that I know what's going on, that I know what is right, that I know what is wrong. It's like, life is a journey. Life is an experience. And we know, of all the things there is to know, most likely we know almost none of it,
Yeah.
And so it is, that's something that I just live with all day, every day. So I don't just like I said of my mom, sometimes I have my opinions, and I can say something about some situation or whatever, and my own experience and whatever. But I always kind of come back to this conclusion, and very quickly too. Like, I don't really hold on to grudges or anything like that. It's a part of my personality. I don't really care for too long about things. I care about the important things, like when I love, I try to do it as best as I can. I try to do those acts of kindness and so on. And I learn from my mistakes and all those things. But when it comes to good and bad in that typical construct, it's just like, nah, like, life is just a journey that we're all on, and we know nothing about it. So let's not pretend and posture like the whole world systemically postures. And this is getting to the way we do it unto ourselves, and how we live the perceived version of us, and then the one we really are. We're always kind of two people in some ways, and technology and all these things make that worse and exacerbate it all, whatever. But genuinely, even without it, once society exists, for a certain amount of time, and there's status and hierarchies, well, then that's what we do. And also, that is also a quality of growth in some ways, in some regards too. We grow as a person by testing our boundaries. And sometimes we test our boundaries by doing something we would not normally do. And so we are posturing to a certain degree. There is a perception of us that we want, and then we make that who we really are, so, and that is the journey of progress, where it's like, I want to learn more. I want to know more about this thing. So I'm going to pursue that and make that my goal to then do that. And so now I am the thing that I was really aiming to be, and so that's a journey of growth, but it's also a kind of existence that, if not checked well, and this is another philosophical idea, the golden mean, like the perfect balance, you don't be too much of this or too little of it, be somewhere in the middle. And so to have that balance, of at what point have you lost control of the perception that you have, and that manifests in the behaviors, like where you say yes to everything, maybe, it's like, oh, that's one of those things where you don't have control over. And I can agree for myself, that situation.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. And I agree with that as well. You said a lot in the way you've said things up to this point, but I'm just curious where you stand, if you have any idea of even if you're willing to talk about it, or how you're willing to talk about it. But do you believe in God? And if so, how has that changed from your, maybe the way you have come to, your upbringing, and And if so, like, is that still something that, I'll use the analogy again of the anchor. Is that something that anchors you in such a way?
You know, that's a really tough question. It really is. It's one that's, you know, maybe it isn't so tough in some ways. I think what it is a fear of speaking as if I know something to be certain, because I don't want to say it in a way that implies that there is no alternative route for someone, or that the way that it shows itself, in my experience, even if it might completely contrast with another person's experience, it is still their own, and it is probably the same experience, just in a different direction, you know. But that said, I have to say that I do, for sure. I think that I understand that it could be a conditioning of my childhood, you know, a brainwashing of sorts. So I'm very aware of that. But I think that, and not even for experiences that I've had, or not for any one particular thing, but because of the totality of it all, you know, where it's like, whether it's the way that I understand it, it's out there, you know, it's real. And, you know, even if you want to be sophisticated in some way, at minimum, it is a way for you to motivate yourself. It's a way, it's a vehicle to motivate oneself. It doesn't have to be. And I think there is strength in it not necessarily being. There's strength in perceiving it in a way that is just a part of you. And to some people that could be not necessary, so therefore they don't need that component. But I think for a lot of people, it is true that they need that kind of motivation. And so for me personally, I think because of the combination of all of that, that there's some truth to it. You know, there's a reality to it. And so for me, I do. And so the way that I do, as I just said, is kind of in that kind of context where
it's definitely different than what maybe the same God or same view of God that we grew up with, right? I mean, like this, you know, like.
Well, I will say that it's real in the way that, like, to this day, it shapes me so much that it is as real as anything else in my life. Like, I talk about, you know, the accounts of the crucifixion and stuff like that, and how, like, as a child, since I was very young, you know, I always used to think that the crucifixion was such a crazy story, and never in the way that I ever heard in a preaching, but just unto myself, I thought, you know, Jesus was crucified, but before he was in the flesh, coming in the body as a way to be an example for humans, that the flesh is so powerful, so overwhelming, that God himself is begging, saying, is there another way? Do I have to die? That's, as we believe, God himself. And he's saying, do I have to die? And that, what is the accounts that he's so stressed that he's sweating blood, right? I've been stressed before, but I've never been that stressed, okay? But why? Because of our skin, because of the flesh as we believe it. And so, or we, you know, growing up, we were taught, I should say. And God himself is begging that. And then he does it anyways. So he sacrifices anyway. So one, that's an amazing lesson of sacrifice, first of all. And one that is why it's hard for me to say no sometimes, is because my level of sacrifice, you know, goes very deep. But there's God himself doing that. And also another, you know, interesting thing is that we don't know anything about Jesus's coming of age, really.
Yeah.
The age that we needed the most guidance.
Yeah, the teenage years, you know?
And so that to me is not, I wonder, I've always wondered why that is.
So there's a lot of human elements to the reason why people leave a form of church or faith and religion entirely as well, you know, because of the human element, you know, the people that they have experiences with and things like that too. But you have a really, really good example of a life of someone. So your mom who follows Jesus has lived this life of such an example that's evident in your life that it almost would make me question whether or not you believed in God because of this I'll call her a godly woman, you know?
Well, yeah, well, I will say that. Well, first to say that God came down to understand us, and I think, once that idea came into my head, it just that's kind of how I see it now. That God came here to understand, and so in that lesson, I can say I understand why it's so hard sometimes. I understand why, when things don't work out or you want something or whatever, or whatever the dilemma you have and the pain that you might be feeling because of it, I understand it. And so that's why there's no right and wrong or anything like that. And how another reason why I feel like life is a journey, because God understands that himself.
Yeah. I mean, that point in itself is so, it's so intricate and so profound and so beautiful, to be quite honest, because this has kind of been the theme of the entirety of it, is that like there's such a beauty in the unknown.
You could insert yourself in the conversation of what is truth all day long till your face turns blue, but at the end of the day, again, that kind of saying that I have is, what are you going to do about it? This is what it is. And so I can spend my life trying to see which methodology has the most sound religious context, or I can concede to the idea that I would just be choosing another faith anyways.
Yeah, you could live your life in such a way that like I'm gonna go out and prove that there's no God, or there's no, but that becomes your religion because you're so passionate and zealous about it.
Oh yeah. There's, I think we've talked about this before, but there's kind of organizations that they spend their lives congregating about against it, and fine for them too, of course.
Yeah, they have a community. They find
they have a community, all that stuff. But at the same time, I could also do that. Anyone could also do that, and there's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, like we said, there's so much intertwined from our child rearing years to our adolescence and so on and so forth up into this present day. Where it would take lifetimes to unwind that. And so that's kind of how I feel about wrestling with the idea of whether or not I believe it today. It's like, or I can just ask myself, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I think it's a good point to end on, because the like I said, there's such a beauty in us not having all the answers and not knowing all the intricacies, and it's also like a part of the beautiful journey is like being able to read people that have, maybe expertise in certain fields, and just hearing all the interesting things and listening to the music that inspires you, being a part of like experiences in life and love and relationships and all these things that just like is a part of this experience, and I'm really glad that it just points us to a direction of like the aimless. Not so much aimless that we don't have a continual like progression or continual desire to move more, but just a comfort in knowing that we don't have it all, or we don't know it all.
And then therefore a purpose to strive for the thing that we need, if there is a need at all, then the purpose is to work towards that goal. And that's the message for so many things, if you need to have a goal in order to experience life.
There's a lot of your story. You and I have been friends for years now, and there's a lot of the story that I still didn't know, and I want to thank you for telling it and being vulnerable. There's a lot of hard stuff that, frankly, I don't know if I would have the strength and courage to do so, but if at the very least, if there's someone that is listening and has something that resonates at any level, I think it's very important that you have shared it. And so thanks for being vulnerable and for your time, man, just for coming and hanging out. And
Yeah, thank you for having me. I feel it as an honor for sure. And for someone that I couldn't ask for a better host, I guess I could say, and a better friend. And, so thank you.